Well, Jesus Christ, that felt great. Did it not? Oh, buddy, last night was the most hopeful I've felt in quite a long time. I don't even love all the candidates who won. Who gives a shit? Who cares? Don't even care at this point. Not right now. Not given the stakes, not given everything that's happened, not not given what they're attempting both for the midterms and in 2028. Last night felt great. Just on a basic observational level, I just saw people living out on social media, living out everywhere they looked, absolutely enthralled with how things went. I mean, listen, honestly, it was basically a year ago that Donald Trump won. It's been obviously been in office since January, and it's just been a reign of terror since then. So this was really the first night, basically, in all that time. Yes, there's been protests and whatnot. And by the way, I do think that the right kind of slept on the significance of some of these protests. Putting that aside, last night was just the first night in such a long while where it felt great, not just to get electoral wins, but to watch the depth of the wins, the breadth of the wins, the subgroups that were showing out in ways that they hadn't before, the electoral margins, the ways in which there had, for example, in New York, Mamdani expanding the electorate, becoming, I think, getting the most amount of raw votes in a New York City mayoral election since 1965. It felt great to win, and it felt great to win in part because of not just the comprehensive sense, the overwhelming amount of winning that was done, but the particular kind of winning. Because, and this is important to mention, there are folks out there, particularly on the right, obviously, trying to be like, well, listen, this was all expected. We expected. I mean, listen, it's New Jersey, right? It's Virginia, it's New York City. What are you really going to say? Like they of course they were going to win. That is such insane cope. That's enormous cope. They cannot deal with the fact that, here's the other takeaway that we really have to get to. Last night was a gigantic coast to coast middle finger to the MAGA experiment, to the Trump 2.0 experiment. It is an absolute indictment of the way in which they have governed. It is an indictment of the kinds of things that they have telegraphed that they want to do. It is an indictment of the way in which they're tearing apart communities. It is an indictment of the way in which they have run this economy. It is an indictment in the way in which this administration has tried to usurp presidential powers and fake emergencies in order to collect more power for themselves. It is an indictment on the way in which the Republican Congress has simply enabled him, despite the fact that they are the leaders of a co-equal branch of government. It is an indictment, to an extent, by the way, to an extent, of the past of the Democratic Party. Now, of course, it's a big win for the Democratic Party more broadly, but there's a little bit of an indictment there as well, or at a bare minimum, a huge lesson that had to be learned. That is another key takeaway in all of this. You saw a ground swell of support, not just for these individual races and these individual candidates in these individual places, but taken collectively. If the right doesn't look at this, and they're not going to, of course, look at this and say, wait a second, maybe people have a problem with the way in which we are governing and the effects that our policies are having, they're going to get absolutely bodied in any election from here on out that is free and fair. And of course, that is the caveat. How can you look at last night's results and come to any other conclusion than this? Of course, this is why they want to gerrymander, which I know is going to yield responses. Well, look at what Gavin Newsom is doing. Isn't that just naked gerrymandering? Yes, of course it is. It's in response to their efforts to gerrymander on their own side through Texas, which, by the way, could blow up in their face. Justin Amash has a whole tweet about this, discussing how this is actually quite a perilous strategy. But the point I'm trying to make is, even, let's say for the sake of argument that it's not, this is why they want to gerrymander more broadly. And this is why the left is reacting the way that they did. And by the way, Kansas, in the wake of last night, dropping their bid to openly gerrymander. Of course, I'm sure there'll be others. And then, of course, Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, coming out and saying, in fact, that he's now on board with a plan should it be necessary. The point I'm trying to make is, if an election is free and fair in 2026, and if an election is free and fair in 2028, these bozos are going to get thumped. Their record is abysmal. They have mini depressions and localized depressions in parts of the country that, like Iowa, that is being ravaged by the Trump administration's attack on renewable energy sources, as well as what's happening to their farmers based on tariffs and a number of other factors as well. They are destroying parts of their own core constituencies in the pursuit of lunatic policies that objectively don't work, to say nothing of what they've done to other individual places that were involved in this particular election. Now, you can look around the country and around media, and you can find a lot of people who are going to give you a much better election recap than I can or will. I want to focus in on just a couple of things. Now, as I mentioned, there's this broad sense of electoral gain that was had here from California down to Miami, by the way. We'll talk about that in just a second, and then all the way up to New York City and other places as well in between. I want to focus on the two things that I kind of had my eye on the most. And that's not to say that they're the most important ones. In fact, the Jersey election is significant in many ways. They were kind of, the Democrats were biting their nails ahead of this one, thinking that it was going to be close. And then she ends up winning by the same margins that Spanberger did, basically, or pretty close to him in Virginia. And in Virginia, you had a very flawed candidate on the Republican side. You did not necessarily have that in the Jersey case, and yet you still saw some of the same electoral gains. As I mentioned, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania was able to maintain the Democratic lead that they had 5-2. There's just a lot of really important electoral wins. But for the purposes of today's video, I want to focus in on the two, as I mentioned, that I have had my eye on the most. The one that I think the country had their one on the most, which of course is the election in New York. And then let's talk about what happened in Virginia, because I had to watch. I don't live in Virginia. I live in Washington, D.C., but I had to watch all of those ads on TV for Jay Jones and his opponent, Miyares. I had to watch it for Spanberger as well. I mean, there was tons of ads that just ended up in my face. So I kind of was paying attention to the races. Let's talk about those two and what it means for the future. First of all, as I mentioned, most raw votes that a candidate has won in an NYC mayoral election since 1965. Congratulations to Zohran Mamdani, which even his skeptics have to agree was a masterful campaign about listening to constituents. Remember, he was out there in the Bronx a year ago asking people who they voted for. If they did vote for Trump, why did they? And he did it without condemnation. He did it without opprobrium. He just did it as a listening tour and used that to inform his campaign. Of course, obviously, that wasn't the only part about the way which he views the world, but it had a big effect on what he did. And every time, dude, the amount of money that was poured into this race from billionaires like Bill Ackman, like Reed Hastings, like the folks from DoorDash and many other places as well, Airbnb, you name it, all of these folks putting tens of millions of dollars into this race to stop him. They tried to call him an Islamist jihadist. They tried to call him a communist. They tried to call him an anti-Semite, and the voters saw right through all of that BS. And I want to be clear, I'm not even sure exactly what kind of job Mamdani is going to do. I don't know if the free buses is really going to improve the speed of buses or improve life in the city. The tax code essentially is, to a large extent, in many ways, out of his hands. There are many things and challenges to the way that he governed, but we are never going back to the neoliberal corporatist side of the party that decides being the attorney for Benjamin Netanyahu are the kinds of people that we want to be party with. Goodbye to all of that. So this is not just about the gains that the wins that he was able to achieve in this particular city, despite all of the, I mean, again, mountains of money thrown against him and the bad faith attacks. How about Representative Ogle out of Tennessee posting videos of the planes from 9/11 landing into the Twin Towers at that time and saying, New York, wake up. I mean, they tried every sick, sinister trick in the book to get voters not to vote for him, and he still won over 50%, which was really the thing that we were looking for. And as I mentioned, some of these other accolades as well. By the way, if you actually look at the voting, it's kind of interesting. People are mad at Curtis Sliwa, but it doesn't really matter because even if you add up his vote total and you add up Cuomo's, it's still not enough for a guy who cleared 50% plus. But what's kind of interesting is relative to the primary, a bunch of voters did seem to me move from Sliwa to Cuomo as a consequence. So it made it a little bit closer, although, you still had 90% of the vote essentially for one or the other left-wing candidate in this particular case. But the point I want to make is this is what I loved about Zohran's campaign was not just about how much it was a kitchen table issues and affordability, not just how much it was about expanding the electorate. There's a great article about how it got the younger folks in New York City who are interested in being a part of this experience, kind of out of their houses and together. It's a really great piece. You should check it out. But also there's another key point here, which is never did Mamdani throw Palestinian struggles under the bus. Never did he throw trans people under the bus. Never did he throw immigrants under the bus. He stayed true to his principles, mediation of his views a little bit over the course of this campaign, but never in a way where you felt like he was throwing core constituencies or turning his back on the people who were supporting his campaign. And frankly, not just supporting his campaign, but the very notion of his campaign identity to begin with. And this is the point I've been trying to make to people, because we're going to watch some of the highlights from his, not concession speech, but the celebration speech. By the way, Sliwa, credit to him, called Mamdani to congratulate him. He never got a call from Eric Adams or Cuomo, but I mean, who cares? Good riddance to all of them. We're gonna look at this speech here, at least just a brief highlight of it, and I want you to pay attention to something that I find profoundly important in all of this. It's this notion of holding on to his own identity, not trying to run from it, where the Vivek Ramaswamis and the Usha Vances of the world, where there's this identity that's brought into the world, but it's mitigated, it is minimized, it's about how much they can weave into the fabric of American society, which, by the way, that is critically important. And speaking to Zeke Hernandez, what he shows is that when you get to second and third generation children of immigrants who come here, that's a big bonus, is how much they actually do weave into the fabric, not so much on the right side of the political aisle, but just more broadly in American society. In some ways, that is also part of the story, but that at the expense of the roots of where they come from, and trying to minimize that is not acceptable. If you believe in the vision of America that New York City presents, which is a pro-immigrant version by any measurement, then you must advocate for that. You must argue for that. You must lean into that. Do you believe fundamentally that immigrants are good for the country? Do you believe that they have enriched us? Do you believe that they are part of the American success story? Well, then if you believe those things, you must campaign on them. You must say that to the public. You must advocate for that to the public, and you must show that. And that is a big part of why Mamdani won.
So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up. We are breathing in the air of a city that has been reborn. I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a democratic socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
That's it. That's what I'm talking about. That is exactly the kind of thing that I am talking about. Presenting to the world the vision and what you believe in. People are going to say, oh, he's getting back to identity politics. You mean he's getting back to defending the things that have been maligned about why he should be, about who he is, about these things that have been used as reasons to disqualify him from office, all of them BS? You mean he went to the mat to defend them? Yes, of course he did. Because we have had this insane overcorrection to what has been presented as, the sort of the 2010s and the woke and what nonsense, to the point where it's even stating the circumstances from which you come, which, by the way, would be totally fine if you were from Appalachia and you use that to defend your identity, which, by the way, you should, because it informs your worldview, it informs your judgment, it informs your priorities. Fair enough, it's fine. But then when it happens on the other side, this now is some kind of race to the bottom of identitarianism. No. This is him showing the world transparently who he is, why he believes the thing he does, where all of this is headed, and he's not going to apologize for any of it, because in his mind, and the voters now agree, this is the best chance they have for a better New York, and a New York that represents them, their interests, their backgrounds, their identities, and what they want.
New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants,
I have been saying this point this whole time. We are having this debate in this country about immigration on the right's terms, absolutely divorced from what the facts on the ground are. Zeke Hernandez, for example, on my Substack and on this YouTube channel, stating unequivocally it is scientifically illiterate to argue, it is statistically illiterate, Zeke Hernandez has argued, to make the claim that immigrants, whether they are illegal or not, have a higher crime rate than citizens do is absolute fiction, statistically illiterate to say something like that. By the way, and could you imagine New York City's identity without immigration, without its Italian populations, without the Jews who have moved there, without, of course, many of the places that have come from the Islamic world, but we're even not just about religions. How many different enclaves of small communities of different nationalities do you have there? The rich tapestry of life and the things that brings to you, the exposure that it offers, the more interesting kinds of people, the more interesting kinds of conversations, the more interesting kinds of foods, all of your approximation to these things gives the richness of life and has made New York City what it is. New York City would not be anything what it is without immigration. It would not be a place of its incredible cuisine. It would not be a place, as I mentioned, of this rich tapestry of life that makes it so unique and so special and such a beacon to the world. It's the greatest city in the United States, in my judgment, and has a claim on the best city in the world. Either way, it can't be any of those things without first being recognized as a city of immigrants. That is the reality. I one time was at the Comedy Cellar in New York City, and I saw a comedian. It's not true, obviously, but it's kind of a funny point. This was 20 years ago, maybe more than that. And he argued, you can't be racist in New York City because you'll just be tired at the end of the day. Now, of course, we know that's not necessarily true, but it sort of speaks to something about the diversity in there. And again, one more time, despite the right trying to go past DEI and all the way to the civil rights era in terms of stripping out protections and legislation and the achievements of that time, diversity is a strength. And I'm going to say it loudly and proudly. I have no problem with that. New York City isn't one of the great cities of the world without that.
Trump, when I say this, to get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us. Thank you.
They wanted in New York City a fighter. They wanted someone who stands up to Trump. Again, I don't know if his policies are going to be successful. I don't know if this whole thing is going to work. I have no clue. But someone who wanted to appease him, Trump, is not the answer to the problem. The left wants fighters. The left wants people who are 10 toes down. The left wants people who understand the urgency of the moment. And in fact, there's going to be an election that we are going to look at in Virginia that's going to really show how true this is. But it bears repeating here. And very quickly, I don't have the video of it, but let me read this quote from Mamdani last night. Quote, "We can respond to oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves."
The next generation of New Yorkers who refuse to accept that the promise of a better future was a relic of the past. You showed that when politics speaks to you without condescension, we can usher in a new era of leadership. This new age will be defined by a competence and a compassion that have too long been placed at odds with one another. We will prove that there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about.
If there's any line that might get him in trouble with the right, not that he cares, it's that one. I saw Ron DeSantis quote tweet that and say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, the famous Reagan line. Nevertheless, this is a better alternative to, well, was there a disaster in your area? Well, FEMA is just not simply going to help you. Or what you're seeing, which is the Trump administration withholding funds from blue states just to screw with them. This idea that, we see you, we care about you, we want this to be helpful, probably is going to be a more resonating argument than you're on your own, tough luck.
It's not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one.
Incredible. Congrats to Zohran Mamdani and his team. By the way, he put Lena Khan as co-chair of the transition team. gives me a lot of hope about who they might staff City Hall with. We're going to have to see. I don't know how he's going to govern. I don't know what Trump is going to do. He probably is going to want to pick a fight, but it's important to say his ascendancy, does it mean the same thing for every subsequent race that Democrats are in? Can you just take New York City politics and paste it everywhere? Yes, of course, there's going to be some limit to that, right? We understand that in some ways we have a more nationalized politics these days, where the things that matter in one place of significance tend to have its own little world, but doesn't necessarily match the national priority. And the national priority has now a way of kind of top-down pressurizing what the locals care about. That is also true. But at the same time, I think that there is clear lessons about simply showing strength, simply showing fight, saying goodbye to the Democratic Party has to be completely transformed to win. To that point, before we move on to Virginia, let me show you this one clip from AOC that speaks to exactly what I'm talking about.
He had to not just defeat a Republican. He had to defeat a Republican and the old guard of the Democratic Party at the same time. He was fighting a war on two fronts and not just one. And he still won resoundingly. And I think the message that sends is that the Democratic Party cannot last much longer by denying the future, by trying to undercut our young, by trying to undercut a next generation of diverse and upcoming Democrats that have the parties, the actual party, our actual electorate and voter support.
There is no future of the Democratic Party with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who, by the way, Chuck Schumer not even endorsing Mamdani at all in the race, ever. Jeffries doing it at the last minute. There is no future with them in control, period. There is only a future with fighters, whether it's Mamdani, whether it is reluctantly, for now, Newsom, or whether it is Spanberger in Virginia. Fighters only. Strength only. Not laying down only. Let's talk about Virginia, because this is important. I don't live in Virginia. I live in Washington, D.C., but I've got a lot of connection to Virginia. I went to, for a brief time, I went to elementary school there for a very brief window, but still sometime in Falls Church. I lived in Virginia when I went to college from 98 to 02 in Williamsburg, Virginia. I was stationed out of Hotel Battery 314, 4th Marine Division, just south of Richmond, from 98 to 04, late 04. And my dad lives in Virginia. My brother lives in Virginia. My sister lives in Virginia. I spend a lot of time in Virginia. Virginia is on my radar. It's an important, obviously, part of the national electorate, but more broadly, or I should say more specifically, it has impact with my life. Abigail Spanberger wins. She's CIA in terms of her background. This is not a thing that I particularly like. Her candidacy is not one whose messaging speaks directly to me. She benefited because her opponent, Winsome Earl-Sears, is a idiot of the highest order. I mean, literally, they were running campaign ads here. I mean, again, I don't live in DC. I live in Virginia. I don't live in Virginia. I live in DC, but I still catch the Virginia campaign ads. She was running an ad. I was watching, I think, Jeopardy on Monday or something. She was running an ad being like, listen, I know I make a lot of verbal goofs, but you don't have to worry about that because I'll govern, fairly for you. And it's like, if you have to make an ad describing how you talk like an idiot, you're probably in trouble. The polling wasn't in her way. More to the point, here's a couple of takeaways you can learn from this election. Earl-Sears, who used to be a Marine, which, I can appreciate, but she's an idiot of the highest order. And part of the problem was that she was leaning into cultural war issues. Like, there was a bunch of her ads that were focusing on, and we don't want men and women's locker rooms. Now, you'll remember during the national election, it was Harris who's with they, them. Remember those ads and then whatnot. And I think that may have had a benefit for Trump specifically. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But it didn't have any benefit for Earl-Sears. She got smoked in this one by double digits. Obviously, Spanberger hitting, I think, nearly, not quite, but nearly 60%. This was a shellacking of the highest order. Now, again, what some folks are going to say is that, well, this is expected. Yeah, it's not unexpected that in an election like this, given the timing of it all, and the sort of the it's, you know, you're getting high propensity voters. It is very likely that, you know, Spanberger was going to win. The polling kind of reflected that. However, I don't think that tells the full story. And in fact, when you drill down, you get to some pretty interesting results. Number one, Spanberger, by the way, Mamdani with young men plus 40, Spanberger plus 14. I don't know exactly what that's going to mean for the 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election, but what I can say very clearly is, and there's been other polling to reflect this, Donald Trump's weakness with young men is growing clearer by the day. They were all in on him in 2024, but they've got buyer's remorse to a huge degree. The Miami Herald had an article just a couple of days ago talking about how it was specifically talking to black men. It was about black people more generally, but how they had buyer's remorse about getting behind some of these causes. And now you're seeing young men really beginning to show up in some of these polls and in these voting results in support of left-leaning election or left-leaning representatives who are running. But let's look at some of the other stuff that we found out. First of all, every single county in Virginia moved left. Every single one of them. Look at this chart. Look at this picture from the Washington Post that I have here, the two of these together. Look at this. Is that not insane to you? Every single part of it moved left. Not a single county stayed where it was or moved the other direction. That is big. Of course, a part of that's going to be turnout, and the right is not going to be as turned out in some of these elections otherwise. But you're talking about places where you had deep red takeover, basically, and that kind of fell apart. Here's an example. First of all, Democrats expanded the majority in Virginia's House of Delegates, flipping 13 GOP seats. So overall, they were already flipping seats, but it gets more important. Now, as I mentioned, all the counties moved. Take a look at this as well. The Virginia Democrats unseated a 36-year incumbent in a district that was 8.5 plus for Trump. So this is Virginia HD 66. If you're looking on a map, this is just south of Fredericksburg, north of Richmond, kind of that Spotsylvania area. And the incumbent here, look at this map I'm going to show you. This was Bobby Orrick, Sr., who had been in there since 1989, always winning by landslide margins. The Democrats took that from him. Take a look at this tweet. The Democrats flipped a Republican school board seat in Roanoke County. Roanoke is in that kind of the sharp westward edge of the state. They beat a Moms for Liberty leader. Now, it's, of course, a very, very close race. It's very tightly contested. But to win that race in that kind of place is an enormous shock. This kind of thing doesn't happen at all. So not only are they flipping seats, they won, by the way, all of them in Northern Virginia, as I mentioned, 13 in the race more broadly. Not only are they flipping seats that are GOP, not only are they doing it in places that are deep red Virginia, as I mentioned, making gains with the subgroups like young men. Take a look at what the Latino vote looked like in Manassas Park. Now, there was something of an overall decline in the amount of votes from 2024 to 2025 in this particular region, but it's a heavily Latino one. Take a look at this. The clearest sign I can find of Latinos abandoning the GOP after Trump's big gains in 2024 is Manassas Park. As I indicated, a city of 17,000 people with a 46% Latino plurality population. Harris won it by 20 in 2024. Spanberger just won it by 42 tonight. By the way, if you look at Spanberger's margin, it's the biggest one in 40 years for a Virginia gubernatorial race. Anyway, you get the idea. Everywhere you look, there's tons of evidence about this. Need I say more about the gains made in the Miami race? There's going to be a runoff now with the first and third in terms of who has the highest vote total being a Democrat. There hasn't been a Democratic mayor in Miami since 1997. You have that. You had them kill the supermajority in Mississippi by picking up seats. Look at some of the gains that were made in Georgia, for crying out loud, and in places in Georgia that you would have never expected to make. Over and over, you are seeing, yes, if you want to zoom out and say, well, of course, a guy who's far to the left won in New York City, and Virginia, who, of course, is reliably blue at this point, they came out for them. You can do that, but it misses the point. And here's why. What Virginia also showed you is, yes, whereas Northern Virginia furious about the Doge layoffs and the cuts to the federal government. I'm sure that they were. But the point I'm trying to make here is that is simply one part of the ingredient. There is a broader sense of the way in which this administration is governing is giving people the ick. The way in which they are governing is making them fearful. The way in which they are governing is making them angry. The way in which they are governing is making them want to lash out. And no place is that clearer than for AG of Virginia, Attorney General. Jay Jones should not have won this race. And honestly, I don't know what kind of a person he is, but putting that to the side, he ends up winning an Attorney General despite having a texting scandal where he had fantasized about killing political opponents and their kids. That would have been any scandal that would have either have forced someone out of the race or had them lose in it in any other year, except this one. And I think people need to understand why. I have seen the right losing their mind about Jay Jones winning, and I understand what he did is odious. What he did is gross. First of all, let me ask a very basic question because I saw Meghan McCain crying about this. Who do you think gave people permission to ignore the bad things that their political candidate that they like says or does? Do you think it might have been someone that the right has been supporting for the last 10 years plus? Could it be that they learned that if you just ignore what the other side says and you lean into your own candidate's comments, or you just, you don't even let it bother you, look at the kind of gains that can be achieved? Who do you think they learned that from? But more to the point, that's not even the issue. The issue is what you saw in Virginia, what you saw in New York, what you saw in Georgia, what you saw in Mississippi, what you saw in California, what you saw in Florida, on New Jersey, and every other place that had an election yesterday, is that the left has looked at a president who is killing fishermen illegally in the Caribbean, who is ignoring Supreme Court orders, and to say nothing of other court orders along the way, who is openly talking about running for a third term, who is tearing apart government agencies illegally, by the way, and then using the same kind of yearly budget for that to then give it to Argentina. This is the same administration that is sending out masked thugs who appear to have no limits constitutionally to what they can do. This is the same administration causing deep economic self-harm, both with their immigration crackdown, to say nothing of the illegal, and the Supreme Court's looking at it now, illegal tariff operation that is happening as well. This is the same administration that is tanking local parts of the country, and we might already be in a housing recession. This is the same kind of administration that is throwing Great Gatsby balls and tearing down parts of the White House while health insurance premiums skyrocket. And by the way, if there was another lesson from yesterday's election, is that obviously the government shutdown has gone quite poorly for the right, and this has clearly improved the position of the Democrats to, I think, reopen the government and potentially with some grand concessions. But more to the point, what is the common denominator here? It is that the people of this country are afraid of what this administration has done. They are angry about it, and they look at what is happening in front of them with the elections that they have as absolutely existential. They look at it as, this is our survival on the line. So they are not going to be deterred by some kind of texting scandal, even if they should have been, and maybe it would have happened in another year. Not this time. You cannot run an operation like Trump 2 and the MAGA Trump 2 operation and think that the rest of the country is going to look at that and say, oh, I guess this is just how it is now. No, fuck you. This is a battle, not merely for the soul of the country, but for the freedom that my children might enjoy. This is a battle for, are we going to have an inexorable economic decline because a co-equal branch of government can't stop the current president from using phony emergency powers to take control of tariffs and taxation? This is an election, by the way, in a moment in time about whether or not we're going to allow iced Gestapo thugs to rip people out of their homes, destroy the fabric of the country, destroy what makes it great, and then lead to further economic self-harm by virtue of a stupid, evidence-free quest to rip out immigrants from this country. Not criminals, immigrants. People see this election as existential. The right can lie to themselves and huff enough copium if they want to tell themselves this is what was going to happen anyway. And I'm here to tell you it wasn't. The results you saw with subgroups, with letting guys like Jay Jones get through, with the margins you saw with Spanberger, the margins you saw in New Jersey, Prop 50 winning, it's the first time in the 21st century that there could be a left-wing mayor of Miami, on and on and on. You are seeing signs of not merely a left-wing resurgence. You are seeing clear repudiation for the way in which this administration has governed, and you are seeing it in such a way that they view the stakes as existential. And that is why last night felt so freaking good. It was the first time that we were able to reclaim a little bit of what had been lost and to reassert a bolder new vision for the future. We are not going back to the party of Cuomo. We are not going back to the party of neoliberalism. We are not going back to the party of compromise. It is only a way forward. It is fighters only. It is leaders only. And we are looking at everything the right has done and said, okay, bet, watch it. It's our turn now.